In a small, peaceful town surrounded by lush green hills, there lived a 16-year-old girl named Emily. She was known for her bright smile and artistic talent, but those who truly knew her understood that her world revolved around one person, her father, Mark. Mark wasn't just a parent to Emily. He was her hero, her guide, and her biggest supporter. From teaching her how to ride a bicycle without training wheels to staying up late helping her with school projects, Mark had always been there. He would sit outside with her on summer nights, pointing out constellations in the sky while sharing stories about his own childhood. His laughter filled their home, making it a place of warmth and happiness. Emily admired everything about her dad. The way he could fix anything that broke, the patience he showed when she struggled with math problems, and even the silly jokes he told at dinner that made her groan but secretly laugh. To her, he wasn't just a father. He was her best friend. They shared dreams too. Emily wanted to become an artist, and Mark encouraged her every step of the way. He bought her sketchbooks and paints, hung her artwork on the walls, and often said, "One day, people will see your paintings and feel what you felt when you created them." But life has a way of changing suddenly, leaving no time to prepare. One ordinary afternoon, as Emily returned from school, she found her mother sitting on the couch, tears streaming down her face. Her heart sank before her mom even spoke. "It's your father," she said softly, her voice trembling. He's gone." The words hit Emily like a storm crashing against the shore. Gone. How could someone so full of life be gone? It didn't make sense. Mark had suffered a sudden heart attack earlier that day. Despite the paramedics' best efforts, they couldn't save him. For days after hearing the news, Emily moved through life like a ghost. Everything felt distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. The house, once alive with laughter and chatter, now echoed with silence. Meals tasted bland, colors seemed dull, and the stars her father loved so much no longer sparkled in the night sky. Instead, they reminded her of all the moments they'd never share again. Her friends tried to comfort her, bringing flowers and cards, but nothing helped. Even painting, her favorite escape, failed to bring her solace. Every brushstroke felt heavy, meaningless, as though her creativity had vanished along with her father. Sleep offered little relief either. Nightmares plagued her, showing visions of losing him over and over again. During the day, memories of their last conversation haunted her. Had she told him she loved him enough? Did he know how much he meant to her? The days leading up to the funeral passed in a blur of tears and numbness. Friends and family gathered to offer condolences, but Emily barely registered their presence. All she could think about was seeing her father one last time. The thought of saying goodbye forever terrified her. Yet deep down, she knew she needed closure. She owed it to herself, and to him, to face this final moment together. Little did she know, what awaited her at the funeral would change everything she thought she understood about life, death, and the mysterious connection between the two. The day of the funeral arrived, casting a somber shadow over the small town. The church was filled to capacity, with people spilling into the aisles and standing along the walls. Neighbors, friends, co-workers, and distant relatives had all come to pay their respects to Mark. Some brought flowers, others shared stories about how he had touched their lives, but for Emily, none of it felt real. She sat in the front pew, clutching her mother's hand tightly, her eyes fixed on the polished wooden coffin at the center of the room. It looked so final, so cold, as if it were trying to seal away every memory she had of her father. As the service began, the pastor spoke kind words about Mark, his kindness, his humor, his dedication to his family. But Emily barely heard them. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying fragments of her childhood. The time he taught her how to swim, the way he cheered loudest at her school plays, the quiet moments when he'd sit beside her and listen without judgment. Each memory was like a knife twisting in her chest, reminding her of everything she had lost. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably, but she didn't wipe them away. She didn't care who saw her cry. Nothing mattered anymore. When the ceremony ended, the crowd slowly filed out. offering hugs and murmured condolences as they passed by. Emily stayed seated, unable to move. Her mother gently urged her to go home and rest, but Emily shook her head. "I need to see him," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her mother hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to give her daughter privacy. The church grew quieter as the last mourners left, leaving Emily alone with the casket. For several minutes she sat there, staring at it, summoning the courage to approach. Her legs felt heavy, each step toward the coffin requiring immense effort. Finally, she stood beside it, her hands trembling as she reached for the lid. With a deep breath, she opened it slowly, revealing her father's peaceful face. He looked almost as if he were sleeping, his features calm and serene. But this wasn't sleep. It was something far more permanent. Emily's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor beside the coffin. Leaning forward, she placed her hands on the edge, her fingers brushing against the fabric lining the casket. Memories flooded back, overwhelming her. She remembered the sound of his laugh, the warmth of his hugs, the way he always seemed to know exactly what to say when she was sad. Now, all that remained was silence. "I miss you so much," she choked out, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to do this without you." Her words dissolved into sobs as she leaned closer, wrapping her arms around him in a desperate embrace. She pressed her cheek against his, holding onto him as though she could will him back to life. The scent of his cologne still lingered faintly, a cruel reminder of how recently he had been alive. As she held him, Emily felt a strange sensation, a warmth spreading through her fingertips, subtle yet undeniable. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, a trick played by grief. But then she noticed something unusual. Beneath her touch, she felt a faint twitch, a movement so slight it could have been mistaken for nothing more than her own shaking hands. Startled, she pulled back slightly, her heart pounding. Was she imagining things, or had something truly happened? Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at her father's face, searching for any sign of change. For a moment, nothing happened, and she wondered if she had imagined the entire thing. But then, something extraordinary occurred, something that would leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about life, death, and the mysterious bond between loved ones. Months had passed since Mark's miraculous return, and life in the small town began to settle into a rhythm again. The initial shock and excitement of his recovery faded into quiet awe, but the story remained etched in everyone's memory. For Emily and Mark, however, the ripple effects of that extraordinary day continued to shape their lives in unexpected ways. One crisp autumn evening, as the golden hues of sunset bathed their living room, there was a knock at the door. Emily opened it to find a man standing on the porch, his presence calm yet commanding. He introduced himself as Dr. Elias Carter, a researcher who specialized in studying near-death experiences, NDEs, and unexplained phenomena. His demeanor was polite, almost gentle, but his piercing gaze suggested he carried secrets far deeper than his casual tone let on. "I've heard about your father's case," Dr. Carter said, addressing Emily and her parents. "It's remarkable. I'd like to learn more if you're open to discussing it." At first, Emily hesitated. The idea of sharing such a personal experience with a stranger felt intrusive, even unsettling. But something about Dr. Carter's sincerity, and the flicker of curiosity in Mark's eyes, convinced her to hear him out. Over tea in their cozy kitchen, Dr. Carter explained his work. He spoke of people who had come back from the brink of death, recounting tales of bright lights, tunnels, and encounters with loved ones who had passed. Some described feelings of overwhelming peace, while others claimed to have gained insight into the mysteries of life and death. Yet none of the cases he'd studied quite matched Mark's. "What happened to you," he said, turning to Mark, "defies everything we currently understand about medicine and consciousness." Mark listened intently, nodding occasionally, but offering little detail about his own experience. When pressed, he admitted he remembered nothing after collapsing at home. Just darkness, followed by waking up to see Emily leaning over him. "It's like I blinked, and suddenly I was back," he said with a shrug. Dr. Carter leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "There are theories," he began, choosing his words carefully. "Some believe that intense emotional connections can create a kind of energy, a bridge, if you will, between this world and whatever lies beyond. Others think it could be tied to quantum physics, where particles exist in multiple states until observed. And then there's the spiritual perspective, which suggests that love is powerful enough to transcend even death." Emily's heart skipped a beat at the mention of love. She thought back to the warmth she'd felt during that embrace, the inexplicable sensation that had coursed through her fingertips. Could it really have been more than grief or imagination? Could her love for her father have somehow played a role in bringing him back? As intriguing as Dr. Carter's theories were, they offered no concrete answers. By the end of their conversation, Emily found herself torn between fascination and frustration. Part of her wanted desperately to understand what had happened, to unravel the mystery once and for all. But another part, the part that had held her father's hand as he took his first breath again, knew that some things weren't meant to be fully understood. That night, as Emily lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind raced with possibilities. What if Dr. Carter was right? What if emotions like love carried a power far greater than anyone realized? Or what if it wasn't about love at all, but something entirely different? Something humanity might never comprehend. In the end, Emily decided it didn't matter. Whether it was science, spirituality, or simply fate, the outcome was the same. Her father was alive. And maybe, just maybe, that was all the explanation she needed. The warmth she'd felt, the miracle she'd witnessed, it was proof enough that life was full of wonders waiting to be embraced, even when they couldn't be explained. In the weeks that followed Mark's miraculous recovery, life in the small town buzzed with speculation and wonder. People couldn't stop talking about what had happened, how a man declared dead had somehow returned to life in the arms of his daughter. Theories ranged from the spiritual to the scientific, but no one could agree on an explanation. Some believed it was a divine act, proof that faith and prayer could move mountains. Others thought it might be tied to Emily's embrace, suggesting that her love had somehow bridged the gap between life and death. For Mark and Emily, however, the focus wasn't on figuring out why it had happened. It was on making the most of the second chance they'd been given. Mark emerged from the experience changed in ways both subtle and profound. He spoke often about feeling as though he'd been granted a new purpose, a reason to live fully and meaningfully. Gone were the days of taking things for granted or putting off dreams for someday. Instead, he threw himself into helping others, volunteering at community centers, mentoring young people, and even organizing fundraisers for families facing medical hardships. His energy was infectious, inspiring those around him to cherish their own lives more deeply. For Emily, her father's return sparked a transformation as well. Before, she had poured her emotions into art as a form of escape. Now, her creativity became a way to process everything she'd been through. Her paintings took on a new depth and vibrancy, capturing the raw intensity of loss, hope, and renewal. One piece, titled The Embrace, depicted a shadowy figure reaching out toward light, symbolizing the moment she held her father in the coffin. It became her most celebrated work, drawing attention not just locally but beyond. Galleries began inviting her to showcase her art, and soon, strangers were moved to tears by the stories behind her brushstrokes. Despite these positive changes, unanswered questions lingered in the background. Mark still struggled to recall anything from the time between his collapse and waking up in the church. He described it as a void, a complete absence of sensation or awareness. When asked how he felt about coming back, he admitted feeling grateful, but also humbled. "I don't know why I'm here," he told Emily one evening as they sat together under the stars. "But I do know this: we're not promised tomorrow. All we have is today." Emily nodded, her mind drifting back to the warmth she'd felt during that unforgettable embrace. She wondered if there was something more to it, if perhaps some unseen force had responded to her desperation and love. Yet, she realized, the specifics didn't matter as much as the outcome. Her father was alive, and that was enough. Their bond grew stronger than ever, forged anew by the shared trauma of losing and regaining each other. They spent hours talking late into the night, sharing thoughts and memories they'd never voiced before. Mark encouraged Emily to dream bigger, reminding her that life was too short to hold back. In turn, Emily inspired him to keep pushing forward, to make every day count. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. Was it really over? Could something so extraordinary happen again? These questions haunted Emily in quiet moments, especially when she found herself staring at her hands, remembering the strange warmth that had coursed through them. But whenever uncertainty threatened to overwhelm her, she reminded herself of one undeniable truth. Miracles exist. They may not always come wrapped in explanations or logic, but sometimes they arrive exactly when you need them most, in the form of a heartbeat, a breath, or a father's smile. And so, life went on. The townspeople continued to marvel at the story, while Mark and Emily embraced each new day with gratitude and purpose. Whatever had brought them back together remained a mystery, but perhaps that was the point. Some things, after all, are meant to be cherished without answers, leaving room for wonder, faith, and the endless possibilities of the human spirit. Dr. Elias Carter's visit left an indelible mark on Emily and Mark, stirring up questions that lingered long after he departed. While his theories about energy, consciousness, and the power of love were fascinating, they also opened a door to uncertainty, forcing Emily to confront emotions she had tried to bury. Was her embrace truly the catalyst for her father's return, or was it something else entirely? These thoughts swirled in her mind like leaves caught in a gust of wind, refusing to settle. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Carter kept in touch, sending articles and research papers about near-death experiences and unexplained phenomena. Some of the stories were inspiring, others bordered on surreal. One account described a woman who claimed her deceased grandmother had appeared during her NDE, urging her to go back to her family. Another spoke of a man who reported seeing visions of events that later came true, as though he'd glimpsed fragments of the future. Each story added another layer of mystery, leaving Emily both intrigued and overwhelmed. Mark, too, became more introspective. Though he still couldn't recall anything from the time between his collapse and waking up, he began to wonder if there was meaning behind his survival. Why him? Why now? He started journaling late at night, jotting down thoughts and reflections, hoping to make sense of his second chance. Occasionally, he shared snippets with Emily, revealing moments of vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "What if this wasn't just for me?" he asked her one evening. "What if it's supposed to help someone else?" Emily didn't have an answer, but the question stayed with her. She thought back to the warmth she'd felt during that embrace, the strange, electric sensation that seemed to pulse through her fingertips. Could it really have been some kind of energy transfer? Or was it simply the intensity of her grief manifesting physically? The more she pondered, the less certain she became. Yet, amidst the confusion, one thing remained clear. Whatever had happened, it had changed them forever. To cope with the lingering questions, Emily threw herself into her art. Her paintings grew bolder, more experimental, blending vibrant colors with abstract shapes to capture the complexity of her emotions. One piece featured two figures, a shadowy silhouette reaching toward a glowing light, connected by threads of gold. Another depicted a pair of hands clasped together, radiating warmth that spilled outward in waves. When asked about the meaning behind her work, Emily smiled softly. "It's about connection," she said. "The invisible bonds that tie us together, even when we can't see them." Meanwhile, word of Mark's recovery continued to spread beyond the town. Local news outlets picked up the story, dubbing it the miracle embrace. Strangers reached out, sharing their own tales of loss, hope, and resilience. Some sent letters thanking Mark for inspiring them to cherish their loved ones. Others sought advice on how to cope with grief. At first, the attention made Emily uneasy. It felt invasive, almost surreal, but over time, she realized it was part of a larger narrative. Their story wasn't just theirs anymore. It belonged to everyone who found solace in its message. One day, while sorting through mail, Emily discovered an envelope addressed to her in elegant handwriting. Inside was a letter from a woman named Sarah, who wrote about losing her teenage son to illness. "Your story gave me hope," Sarah confessed. "I don't believe my boy will come back, but reading about your miracle reminded me that love never truly dies. Thank you for reminding me of that." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she read the words. For months, she had been consumed by questions, searching for answers that might never come. But this letter shifted her perspective. Maybe understanding wasn't the point. Maybe the real miracle wasn't just her father's return. It was the way their experience touched others, sparking light in places shrouded by darkness. That night, sitting beside her father under a sky dotted with stars, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. The mysteries surrounding that fateful day would always remain unresolved, and perhaps that was okay. Life, she realized, wasn't meant to be fully understood. It was meant to be lived, embraced, and shared. And as long as she had her father by her side, she knew she could face anything, even the unknown. As Emily pulled back slightly from her father's body, her mind raced with confusion and disbelief. The warmth she had felt wasn't just in her imagination. It was real, spreading through her fingertips like a gentle current. She stared at his face intently, searching for any sign of life. For a moment, everything seemed still, the kind of silence that feels heavy, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Then, against all logic, something happened. Her father's hand twitched. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but Emily saw it. His fingers moved ever so slightly beneath hers, brushing against her palm. Her heart skipped a beat, and her breath caught in her throat. Was this real? Or was grief playing tricks on her mind? She blinked rapidly, trying to steady herself, but the movement came again. A tiny, deliberate flex of his fingers. It wasn't random or involuntary. It felt alive. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The word barely escaped her lips, fragile and unsure. She leaned closer, her eyes locked onto his face, desperate for some kind of response. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing changed. His eyes remained closed, his expression peaceful yet unresponsive. Emily's hope wavered, and she wondered if she was losing her grip on reality. Maybe the stress and sorrow had finally pushed her over the edge. But then, it happened again, this time more pronounced. A soft gasp escaped Mark's lips, so faint it could have been mistaken for the rustle of fabric or the distant echo of footsteps outside the church. But Emily heard it clearly, her ears straining to catch every sound. Her pulse quickened as she watched his chest rise ever so slightly, the first shallow breath breaking the illusion of death. His eyelids fluttered weakly, as though struggling to open after a long sleep. Emily froze, her body rigid with shock. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. Her father was gone. Everyone said so. The doctors, the paramedics, even her own mother had accepted the finality of his passing. Yet here he was, defying every rule, every expectation. Tears streamed down Emily's face, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of disbelief, wonder, and an overwhelming surge of hope. Without thinking, she reached out and grabbed his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Dad, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "Can you hear me?" Her words tumbled out in a rush, each syllable laced with desperation. She needed him to wake up fully, to look at her, to tell her everything would be okay. She needed proof that this wasn't some cruel trick of fate. And then, slowly, his eyelids parted. At first, his gaze was unfocused, clouded with confusion, as though he were emerging from a deep fog. But as his eyes adjusted to the light, they landed on Emily. Recognition flickered in them, followed by a spark of awareness. "Emily," he croaked, his voice hoarse and barely audible. The single word sent shivers down her spine, both terrifying and exhilarating. For a moment, neither of them moved. Time seemed to stand still as they stared at each other, bridging a gap that should have been impossible to cross. Emily's mind raced with questions. How was this happening? Why was it happening? But none of those answers mattered right now. All that mattered was that her father was here, looking at her, speaking to her. He was alive. Summoning every ounce of strength, Emily screamed for help, her voice echoing through the empty church. Footsteps pounded outside as people rushed back in, drawn by her cries. Doctors and paramedics appeared, their faces etched with shock and disbelief as they assessed the situation. Emily stepped aside reluctantly, her hands shaking as she watched them examine her father. Questions flew around the room, but no one had answers. Not yet. What Emily did know, however, was that something extraordinary had occurred, something beyond explanation. Whether it was a miracle, science, or something entirely different, she didn't care. In that moment, all that mattered was the undeniable truth. Her father was no longer gone, and whatever force had brought him back, it had done so through her, a daughter who refused to let go, whose love transcended even the boundaries of life and death. As months turned into a year, Emily and Mark's lives settled into a rhythm of gratitude and purpose. The initial whirlwind of attention had faded, but the impact of their story lingered, not just in their own hearts, but in the lives of those it had touched. Strangers continued to reach out, sharing how the tale of the miracle embrace had inspired them to hold their loved ones closer, to forgive old wounds, or to find strength in moments of despair. Each message reminded Emily that even the most mysterious events could ripple outward, creating waves of hope far beyond what they could see. For Emily, life began to feel like a delicate balance between wonder and acceptance. She still thought about the warmth she'd felt during that embrace, the inexplicable sensation that seemed to defy logic. Sometimes she would stare at her hands, half expecting to feel it again, as if waiting for some hidden truth to reveal itself. But no answers came, and eventually, she stopped searching so desperately. Instead, she chose to focus on the beauty of the present moment. Her father's laughter echoing through the house, her mother's quiet strength, and the way sunlight danced across her canvas as she painted. Her art became a bridge between the ordinary and the extraordinary, capturing emotions that words alone couldn't express. One of her latest pieces, titled Threads of Light, depicted two figures intertwined by shimmering strands of gold, symbolizing the invisible connections that bind people together. It resonated deeply with viewers, many of whom saw reflections of their own relationships in its abstract lines and colors. Critics praised her work, calling it emotionally raw yet profoundly hopeful, but for Emily, the true reward was knowing her art brought comfort to others. Mark, too, embraced his second chance with renewed vigor. He volunteered at a local hospice, offering companionship to patients nearing the end of their lives. His presence brought solace to families grappling with loss, reminding them that love endured even after goodbye. On weekends, he joined Emily in her studio, watching her paint and occasionally sketching alongside her. Their shared creativity deepened their bond, transforming their home into a sanctuary of joy and healing. Yet, there were quiet moments when Emily found herself wondering about the bigger picture. Was their miracle meant to teach them something? Or was it simply a reminder of how fragile and precious life truly was? These questions didn't trouble her as much as they once had. Instead, they felt like gentle whispers, nudging her to live fully and love fiercely. One crisp winter evening, as snow blanketed the ground outside, Emily and Mark sat together by the fireplace, sipping hot cocoa. The room glowed softly with the flicker of flames, casting warm shadows on the walls. "Do you ever think about it?" Emily asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "About what?" Mark replied, raising an eyebrow. "That day," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened? Why it happened?" Mark set his mug down and leaned back, gazing thoughtfully into the fire. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, with a small smile, he said, "I used to think about it all the time. I wanted answers, explanations, something to make sense of it. But now, I think maybe we're not supposed to understand everything." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes I'd wonder if it's okay to just let it be. To accept that some things are bigger than us." Mark reached over and squeezed her hand, his touch steady and reassuring. "That's exactly what I'm saying. Life is full of mysteries, Emily, and maybe the greatest one isn't why I came back. It's the fact that we get to share this time together. That's enough for me." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude for her father's return, for the lessons they'd learned, and for the unbreakable bond they shared. In that moment, she realized that while the mystery might never be solved, it didn't need to be. What mattered was the love that connected them, a love so powerful it had defied death itself. As the fire crackled and the snow fell silently outside, Emily leaned her head against her father's shoulder, feeling a profound sense of peace. Whatever force had brought him back, whether it was science, spirit, or pure serendipity, it had given them a gift they would treasure forever, the chance to keep living, loving, and embracing every moment life had to offer. The room erupted into chaos as doctors and paramedics rushed to Mark's side, their movements quick but calculated. Emily stood frozen a few steps away, her hands clasped tightly together, her knuckles white from the tension. Her heart pounded so loudly, she could barely hear the flurry of voices around her. "He's breathing," one doctor exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. Another checked his pulse, shaking his head in astonishment. This shouldn't be possible," he muttered under his breath. Mark's eyes fluttered open again, and this time they stayed open. He looked around the room, clearly disoriented, his gaze darting from face to face, before finally settling on Emily. She took a hesitant step forward, her lips trembling as she tried to form words. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. His response was weak but unmistakable, a faint nod, followed by a small, reassuring smile. It was enough to make Emily burst into tears again, but this time they were tears of joy, relief, and sheer wonder. The medical team worked quickly, attaching monitors and checking vitals, their professionalism masking the shock that rippled through them. Mark's heartbeat was steady, his oxygen levels normal, and his body showed no signs of the trauma that had claimed his life just days earlier. Yet none of it made sense. People didn't come back from death. Not like this. The doctors exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of awe and confusion. One of them pulled out a phone, likely calling for reinforcements or consulting specialists, while another began jotting down notes furiously. Emily hovered nearby, unwilling to leave her father's side even for a moment. Her mother arrived soon after, having been summoned by the commotion. When she saw Mark awake, her reaction mirrored Emily's. Tears streamed down her face as she rushed to his side, clutching his hand as if afraid he might disappear again. "Mark, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice shaky but filled with hope. He turned his head toward her, his eyes softening. "I'm here," he murmured, his voice raspy but clear. Questions poured in from every direction. What did he remember? How did he feel? Did he know where he was? Mark struggled to answer, his thoughts fragmented and jumbled. He recalled collapsing at home, a sharp pain in his chest. Then, nothing. Darkness. Silence. And then, suddenly, waking up to see Emily leaning over him, her face streaked with tears. Beyond that, there was little he could explain. He didn't understand what had happened any more than anyone else did. As the initial shock began to settle, whispers spread among the crowd that had gathered outside the church. Word traveled fast in a small town, and soon the story of Mark's miraculous recovery became the talk of the community. Some called it divine intervention, attributing it to prayers answered and faith rewarded. Others speculated about unexplained phenomena. citing tales of near-death experiences and inexplicable awakenings. A few skeptics suggested there must be a scientific explanation, a misdiagnosis, perhaps, or some overlooked detail in his condition, but even they couldn't deny the strangeness of it all. For Emily, none of the theories mattered. All she cared about was that her father was alive. As the doctors prepared to transport him to the hospital for further evaluation, she refused to let go of his hand. "You're not leaving me again," she said firmly, her voice steadier than it had been in days. Mark squeezed her fingers weakly, offering a silent promise that he wasn't going anywhere. At the hospital, tests confirmed what everyone already knew. Mark was alive, healthy, and showing no signs of the catastrophic event that had supposedly taken his life. Doctors ran scans, drew blood, and pored over his medical records, searching for answers. But no matter how many times they analyzed the data, one fact remained undeniable. Mark had returned from the brink of death without explanation. As the hours passed, Emily sat by his bedside, holding his hand and marveling at the miracle unfolding before her eyes. She replayed the moment in the church over and over in her mind, the warmth in her fingertips, the twitch of his hand, the gasp of breath that defied logic. Something extraordinary had happened, something that transcended science and reason. Whatever it was, it had brought her father back. And though she couldn't explain it, she knew one thing for certain: love had played a part. Love, and maybe something far greater than anyone could comprehend.